Great. So it is 12:30 and it is time to go live with our webinar for today, Crossing the Chasm in SaaS. This is a super exciting webinar for us all. So we will start by doing some introductions to our speaker. That's one of us, and the other one is me who's hosting the webinar, Sarah. I will move over to our setup for the panel so we can do a short speaker introduction. And get started with our webinar. So give me a second here. There we go. Here we are. So my name is Sarah Storm. I am the co-founder of Break the Box. We will do an intro to our co-founder George here, who's in the room as well, and also to me, and then we will get started with how we cross the chasm in SaaS. So my name is Sarah. I have been in revenue for 22 years now, almost my entire career, and I have worked with SaaS companies since 2012, specifically tailored to mid-market, and I have been working in a lot of projects, training revenue teams and leading revenue teams to be able to sort of do the journey that we're going to talk about today. We will also do an intro to George. So George, I will hand it over to you to do an intro of yourself, and then we will dive into the topic for today.
Right. Who am I? My name is George. Very similar career to Sarah. Also 22 years in sales and revenue operations. The last 10, I want to say, maybe 11 have been spent into B2B SaaS. I started as a pre-seed consultant. I then went through the entire startup to scale up journey with a Swedish company called Scribe. And as of last year, I am the CEO and co-founder for Break the Box. Yeah, that's pretty much it on my end for now. I will get to speak a lot today, so we're good.
Great, thank you, George. And guys, the people who are in the webinar now, feel free to put where you're signing in from in the chat. It's super nice to see so many people already speaking in there. And also, if you can, since I am also hosting the webinar, put questions in either the question section or in the chat, that is the normal chat. You are free to ask anything during the session, and we will try to answer most of the questions at the end, or even during, depending on what the question is related to. We will run for 27 minutes more, so half an hour will be the session time. And we are super excited to go in and really deep dive into crossing the chasm, the concept, and everything else. So put in the chat where you're signing in for. We see Uddevalla, Stockholm. Looks like we have from Denmark, outside of Copenhagen, Slovenia, Stockholm, Sweden, with an actual emoji here. Great. So happy to see so many here. We will share the recording, some hygienic factors. We will share the recording on demand after the session is over. There is also a handout, which is the presentation deck. You're obviously welcome to connect with us on LinkedIn. And if you have any questions to us after, feel free to connect and ask. And let's make this an interaction session, at least in the end, so we can get some questions and sort of deep dive into George's perspective, which will be the main speaker for today. So with that in mind, I will actually move over to the starting point. And George, the scene will be yours. We can see your presentation now, and I will mute so you can get back to speaking.
Which means that I need to unmute. Interesting. Cool. All right. So we're going to talk about a quite old topic or quite old concept for sales or for business development in general. It has been used very, very much and very, very extensively in SaaS. Either it is boardrooms or conferences or podcasts, webinars, what have you. Since a while back, I actually think we have a friend in the chat that has actually met the author from whom the relevant book comes from. So I will start with doing a very brief introduction of what crossing the chasm as a concept actually is. And give a bit of background. So crossing the chasm comes from an author called Geoffrey Moore. and the book of the same name that he published all the way back to 1991. And looking at the chat, I'm willing to bet that there is a good 50% of our audience that haven't been born at that point in time, which is one of the reasons that we're gonna follow sort of a red thread on relevance on this concept. So what is basically crossing the chasm in that context? It talks about product adoption or product fit in several segments of the market. So there is the book separates the market in 5 segments, starting with innovators, early adopters, the early majority, late majority, and what the author calls laggards. And at that point, when we talked about the chasm in the early stages of SaaS companies, he identified the biggest gap between adoption in segments to be between early adopters and early majority. So where it has also been called the graveyard of startups, or the graveyard of new companies, referring to the fact that most companies didn't manage to bridge that gap from innovators and early adopters to go ahead and capture an early majority and keep climbing that curve. And the author also breaks down the market, or rather breaks down these segments further into the personalities that these people, or the stakeholders, or the buyer personas in our terms, in these companies, how they behave and how they buy, and how their psychology works around making purchasing decisions. Or evaluation decisions. So he splits the segments into starting from enthusiasts, people that are very enthusiastic about tech, the first people to test new technology, new gadgets, new innovative methods. And these people are not as much interested in direct benefit necessarily. They're more interested in learning, and they're more interested to a degree to novelty as well. And they're willing to evaluate new concepts. Then we move to visionaries, which are people on the buyer side that don't need the business cases or the proven track record or the industry age in order to make a purchasing decision. They see ahead in the future of how this specific piece of technology will shape the future of their business, even though it's not here yet. And they're aiming for a competitive advantage from being early adopters. And then we have on early majority, we have the pragmatists, people basically that weight between benefit and risk. They are quite level-headed, so they will look into business cases, they will look into references, they will look into track record and make as pragmatic of a decision as possible for purchasing technology. Then we go to conservatives. There we split, or we invert the scale a bit. When for pragmatists, risk and benefit are pretty much equal. For conservatives, risk is first and then benefit. Financial institutions, as an example, the majority of financial institutions fit in that category. So they purchase on risk first, benefit second. And then on the laggard category, we have skeptics, people that are in general resistant to change, resistant to new technology, resistant to shift a way of working because they feel it's very invasive. And with that, I want to just explain how the split is explained in the book. Mr. Moore explains that the early market is approximately 25% of the total addressable market, roughly, in each industry, where the late market, which is the big growth potential, is a lot larger. So 25 to 75% split. The problem is, or at least the problem for me in this scenario is this is written in 1991. We have gone through several tech innovations and several world events in between. I think that the logic is sound. I think that the methodology is super relevant to today. However, the way that the concept is fleshed out, or was fleshed out in 1991, needs a bit of glow up, if I can call it that, or it needs a bit of a touch up to be more relevant to us today. And going to the next period. So how does crossing the chasm, or how did crossing the chasm looked between 2020 and 2022, moving a bit more forward in time? So to introduce this segment, I will refer to an article called Why Software is Eating the World by a journalist called Mark Anderson. It was published in the New York Times around 2011, 2012. I suggest that you have a look at that. And the quote from that article that I thought was relevant for what I want to talk about on this segment is the following. So we are in the middle of a dramatic and broad technological and economic shift in which software companies are poised to take over large swaths of the economy. So basically what Mark is talking about, I'm talking about Mark like we're friends, but I haven't met the guy. But what he's talking about is that we have moved from 1991, where technology in many segments was very fresh, many segments were very new, and there was a lot more skepticism in the market. We are, by 2011, 2012, we have already moved to a place where technology is more widely adopted. And to quote him from another excerpt of this article is that by that point, the market gets it. The market at large understands that we need technology as an enabler to operate, to stay competitive, and to make our businesses more profitable and more efficient. So the first thing that happened in according to this principle is that the percentage of the market shifted, and with the percentage, the chasm that companies need to cross has also shifted a bit more in the middle. So the early market, the market that gets it, or that has understood by that point the pivotal role of technology in business development, is a lot bigger. So we're shifting basically to a 70-30 split, where the pragmatists that we talked about before are more prone to adopt earlier or to be more open to innovative technology than they were 20 years ago. And I want to add to that what Mark didn't know at the time is that we would go through 2 years of a pandemic, through which this window, or this percentage has shifted even further, which means that even conservatives had to move from this could be something to look at, or this could be a nice to have, to a place where if they didn't implement specific pieces of technology during the lockdown, they would have to close their doors. Which meant that a lot of risk and compliance, a lot of purchasing departments have shifted a lot to the left, I now realized the colors in my presentation. So they shifted a lot to the red side of this graph, being a bit more open. So in my opinion, up until very recently, the chasm that companies have to cross are after the early majority. I think that most startups, if they manage to get through the first threshold, so the first 10 paying customers, product market fit, funding, and get an initial momentum, then there is a better chance than it was in the early 2000s to capture parts of the early majority. Again, depending on the product, depending on the competence of the team, and a lot of other factors.
I have a question that I think fits very well here. How can companies identify when they're approaching the chasm? And I thought maybe you would like to answer that already now, or we can wait until the Q&A.
I will answer it now because there is no shot I remember it until the Q&A. So usually it has to do, how much you approach an influx point or the chasm in that situation is measured by growth metrics. So when your company growth starts stalling, because when you start, you're looking at even triple digits in the early stages, right? Then you start going for 40%, 42%, and then it's sort of, the bigger you go, the more it starts stagnating. If it stagnates below a certain number, and I can't give you that because it varies largely from company to company, then if the growth starts to stagnate, then it is time to either push for the next level. I've seen a lot of companies being able to capture big parts of the market that are not on the conservative side. For instance, when I worked at Scribe, we were operating for several years. The Fortune 500 companies, the big banks, the very risk-averse organizations were still elusive for several years, where we needed to readdress our strategy of how much time and effort we spend in order to take that next step. Because as everybody understands in this room, I'm sure, the benefit of working with that side of people that are a bit more risk averse, since they are a big chunk of the market, and also they tend to have a lot larger budgets than their colleagues on the left side of this graph, was imperative for us to move ahead. So it was 2021 mid-pandemic that this is the market shifted, as I explained, and also we had the strategy that we had to actively address that part of the market to continue the journey and to continue growing the growth numbers in that capacity. And I see that.
Thank you.
Thank you. So moving on to, I want to move on to today, because this is 2022, the last update of this graph, in my opinion. And then we go to today, which is, it looks sort of like this. And I will explain why it looks like this. It looks like this because I wanted to produce a picture where I throw all of this in a blender and then something comes out. I don't have the graphic design skills to do that. So this is the best that I could come up with. I will explain what I mean. And I will, of course, talk about AI, because how would we have a webinar without mentioning AI? I think that's borderline illegal nowadays. So I want to talk about how crossing the chasm works in, or doesn't, in 2024, with AI being a tech staple by now. And I want to quote the CEO. I don't know, he is on and off CEO of OpenAI. I'm not sure what the status is now, to be transparent, but Sam Altman, where he said, in an interview quite recently, there was a time where the iPhone App Store launched, where people talk about being, in which point people were talking about being a mobile company. So with the rise of the mobile apps at the time, but no software company says they're a mobile company now, because it's unthinkable to not have a mobile app. So something that was innovative at the time has moved over several years to a commodity, right? So that journey followed similar logic to the Bell diagram we were looking from 1991 to 2011. It took several years for people to catch up, and for now to be self-explanatory that everybody has an app, right? To continue the quote, he continues to say that, and it will be unthinkable not to have essentially intelligence or AI integrated to every product and service in the future, which is quite interesting how the curve develops now, because AI has been popularized roughly 2 years ago. And already today, in 2 years, we're talking about VCs looking at 73% of their investments going into AI companies. We're looking at the market interest being almost zeroed in to AI first products or AI enhanced products. So that curve that was gradual in the beginning and had clear definitions of how people adopt over time, or how people interface new technology over time, has shifted dramatically, or basically it has turned on its head completely. Which means that if you look at the top part of this diagram now, I feel that since there is an influx of competition, since the market is a lot more skeptical, since the adoption is going a lot faster, the techniques that we used in 1991 or even 2010 are not that effective anymore. Having time to slowly educate the market, work with brand positioning, get and introduce early adopters, and then follow the curve to growth is not a fail-safe strategy anymore, because things are moving way too fast. I see startups fail between enthusiasts and early adopters, because they don't manage to stand out enough, because again, things are moving in a very different speed. And I've also seen companies that are moving sort of seamlessly from point to point, or even skipping steps, because of how the market and the trends sort of develop on the technology side. And seeing you, Sarah, probably.
I have a question. Yes, so I will show it in the chat. I also have several people who wants to go on camera and talk to you. So we need more time for the next webinar, because we won't be able to do all the things we want to do. So the question is, any thoughts on how competition affects continued growth after early stage when it comes to SW, I'm going to assume that's Swedish companies, as there are relatively small investments needed to create a similar product, being a copycat compared to other industries where physical inventory and innovations are needed. So my question is probably, if I'm going to summarize from Michael, how does the competition affect continued growth after early stages?
Okay, so that largely depends. Competition can act as validation. Depends on if it is a product introducing a new category, or if it is an already existing market. So competition in early categories acts as validation. SW software companies, okay. In other situations, what it enforces, what I have experienced, is that it forces people to niche down, or to narrow down to what part of the market they really want. Where do they want to, who do they want to be the top solution for? Because as I used to say to my customer for several years, no solution is good for absolutely everyone, and anybody that claims that is either ill-informed or they're lying to you. So I think competition in the software market helps at least companies that work with strategy ongoingly to sharpen up their ICP and niche down in the segments that are more profitable and more likely for them to win. I can also mention an example. In Sweden only, there were 2 years ago at least 15 e-signing companies, if I'm not mistaken. So it started from 2, it grew to 12, 15 when I was at Scribe. And what we had to do, what several of our branch colleagues had to do, is to be very blunt, pick a lane where they want to follow, both messaging, market size, communication, brand positioning, pricing, to address and try to capture that category specifically. I answered. If I didn't, Michael, please message me on LinkedIn and I can elaborate further.
Great, thank you so much. So I have 2 things. Time-wise, we have 3 minutes left. We will go to the slide with key takeaways, and then we can stay on and take Viveka, who wants to go on camera and ask a question about information overload or information processes. So if anyone needs to jump out, they can after the key takeaways. So I will move over to your screen now so you can keep sharing, and let's do that in 3 minutes.
Right. I don't think that they need 3 minutes. I will just drill down to what I'm trying to say. We looked at the concept. We looked at how the market looks today. And since there is a lot of, we live in a time that there is a lot of insecurity. There is a lot of people that are very secure that they can predict the future, and they get subverted month after month after month after month lately. So what our advice would be as a key takeaway, besides looking at the literature, I think it's super interesting. I recommend to everyone to read the book and the article. You can find the links in the presentation after, and look at the methodology, because as a boilerplate to make decisions and how to think is super, super interesting. But when it comes to key takeaways from what can we do today, is to start by understanding the market in depth. Again, paralleling to Michael's question before, who are we selling to? What problem are we solving? Why should it be our company that is solving that problem? So for that specific segment of the market, then look into narrowing down and niching down a lot on ICP. Even if you pick a market, there are segments in this market, either that is geography or number of employees or the product that they sell or their history or their risk profile. There are hundreds of things that you can tailor there. But for me, if you take one thing, take the last one. Psychographics or psychographics are more important than they have ever been since they were introduced in that context in 1991, talking about the psychology of making decisions, what moves people to take action. Either it is risk, or it is a vision, or maybe it is curiosity, maybe it is investment in new technology, it's personal positioning, career development. It can be so many things. Look at the profiles, because I think that the profiles in the book are super relevant still. I think they just got very jumbled around nowadays. So work on understanding the motivations, aspirations, and the dreams of your prospects, of your buyers, of your customers, to understanding what the emotional value of each decision is. And that is all, I think.
Thank you so much. We will actually spend some time on questions now. I know most people will jump off at one, but they can see the recording after. So I have several ones now. I will push them to the screen, and then I will mute myself so you can answer. The first question is, what about the companies, the startups that has managed to cross the chasm and want to continue scaling? I think the question is, what do you do after you've crossed that part? That's a longer question, but I'm going to let you summarize in like 2 minutes.
Yeah, I will try to answer in a very contained manner. So actually, it is more treacherous than you think. I think this is a really good question, because it's not only managing for your company to not die, which is what the chasm represents, is as I said, is the graveyard of most companies. But how do you then accelerate, and I will use my favorite buzzword in SaaS, build a scalable business, right? Because once you reach a point where you work with late majority, you really need to take steps to mature your organization to match the level of maturity that the late majority has. Companies that have been around for 120 years, or 60 or 50 or 20 years, don't make purchasing decisions or renewal decisions or expansion decisions, or they don't interface onboarding or ROI the same as a SaaS company does. So there is a big maturity curve that you need to climb once you cross the chasm in that sense.
Thank you so much. I hope that answered the question fully. There are plenty of things to talk about with us in DMs on LinkedIn later. Let's take the next one. So how can AI-driven tools help SaaS companies bridge the gap between early adopters and the mainstream market? Are there any specific tools you recommend? And now we're into the tool swamp, but let's go ahead. I will unmute you and let you answer this one.
Though when it comes to AI tooling, since the question is quite wide, nothing will apply to everyone. I think it can help a lot with efficiency in operations and not front load cost a lot in the early stages before you have a stable income, and you can rest assured both to yourself and to your investors that your company will survive, which means you can probably skip on making a splash on hiring in order to have the manpower to do that transition. When it comes to tooling, and specifically, I will actually do ping pong now, and I will give that question to Sarah, because I don't remember.
It's a great question. So when it comes to tooling, we could give recommendations today, and in 3 weeks, there will be other tools on the market. So this is a question that is sort of, it's a paradox, because we can't really go and look at what we should be doing now because of how the market is moving. So I have no tooling tip, because that's not the point, and that's not sort of how we get to a point where we reach this market and we cross the chasm. Because the tooling you will apply will depend on which market you're trying to target, which ICP you're trying to target, how you're trying to do it. Obviously, there are plenty of intelligent platforms today to use, but building tech stack must relate to what you are planning to do now and the coming 2 years, and you won't be able to fully plan for that. So that's going to be my answer to that question. And with that, I have the third question here that I will put on the screen, and this is an interesting one. Is the current right-wing conservative mindset sweeping over the world a deterrent for new market expansion?
Okay, going into my favorite topics and politics. There is I will try to answer it from another angle. There is hesitancy. There are issues with the rise of the right-wing sentiment, right? I see a lot of issues when it comes to hiring international talent. We see areas like Sweden that are very, very strapped for talent, specifically for SaaS companies, high-skilled developers, high-skilled salespeople, revenue people, high-skilled managers. I still see every second, third ad be fully in Swedish and needing fluency in the language and stuff like that. That window moved over COVID. I think we are unfortunately reverting back to higher local, which is, I hope that the motivation was not what it is. I don't personally believe it. I think there are other criteria in there to why companies are making these decisions. And when it comes to market expansion, I think it is losing sight of how to work together, or losing interest rather of how to work together, how to understand different cultures, of course, will to an extent blind your business strategy too. Again, historically, conservative stances from a company perspective have been very hurtful to the bottom line as well, besides, well, being inhumane.
Thank you so much for your standpoint on this. Again, we are 5 minutes over time now, so we will actually wrap up the webinar for today. There are plenty of questions that haven't been answered. We apologize for that. We will make longer webinars the next time, so we have 15 minutes to chat.
We said we have a on-camera question.
We do. Yeah, I guess we could take that too. Let's invite Viveka to the stage and see if she's still able to. And now we will see how this will work, because now I can only, oh, here we go. We did it. Welcome, Viveka. I will move over and mute myself and let George and you have the conversation and do the question.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me?
I do.
Okay, good. I actually think that you sort of answered my question already, George, but let me first say hi to everybody still here. I think the topic is quite interesting, especially for me, born before 1991. I have never heard about this before. So always good to get new info, especially when you are in SaaS, as I am myself. So my question was in regards to korvstoppning, and it's sort of like, that's a very, very Swedish expression, by the way, talking about being inclusive. So basically that means information overload in this scenario. So my question initially was something of the sort of, how do we sort of like avoid getting into the chasm because of the information overload and everything that is accessible and available for us out there? It's like, how do we actually get people to make a decision? Or rather, how do we avoid them getting into this should I or should I not, and just making a decision because of the fact that they have so much on the table to choose from, which is also something that you are very much facing when you talk about e-commerce. Like the big thing there is that how do you get, great ways of introducing people to exactly what you're talking about, the sweet spot, like exactly what they want, so that they get an easy choice. I think that you sort of answered it already, but if you have something that you want to add to that.
I can, yes, and partially when it comes to niching down, there is a point for B2C and for e-commerce and for B2B SaaS companies. Again, the more you niche down to what you want, who do you want to address and how, and what would that mean emotionally for that person if they were to make that decision, because this is why the psychographics is the most important takeaway of this session. Because we tend in business language, specifically sales language, to talk in a very stale manner. Yes, ROI is important. Yes, metrics. Yes, 33% growth in pipeline, blah, 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 blah. And in the end of the day, every buyer goes away. And the same with products. Every buyer goes away. It's like, okay, this is noise. I've heard this 16, 17 times today. Even if it's true, I don't really care. Because people don't make decisions like that. They don't only make decisions, but if I give you the facts, otherwise we wouldn't have made, any of us in this room or audience would have made any irrational decisions in our lives ever. That's not how human beings work. So when it comes to understanding as a top level your market, then the subsegment of your market that you fit into, and then the individuals that you're trying to reach, what makes them tick. And then once you understand that correlation and keep following it, for B2C is more looking at trends, looking at demographics, how they develop, what they are interested about in periods. Event-based marketing is super popular if you look at the social media apps as an example. But for me, at the end of the day, is there is an altruistic angle to this too. We're not trying to push product. Like this should not be what we get up Monday morning to do, to just shove as much product as we can to people's faces. It's about understanding, because for me, sales has always been about psychology, understanding how people make decisions, what makes them feel good, what with a decision, which is usually what declutters the noise that you talked about, the korvstoppning. This is what usually acts as a cleanser in that scenario. From the perspective that we will hear both in private conversations and even in high-level business discussions, that felt good. Like that felt like the right thing to do. So shifting into understanding psychology and emotional decision making too will make a big difference.
Thank you so much, George. And thank you, Vivica, for jumping on camera and joining us. I will now say that we will wrap up for today. Thank you, everyone, for being here. My name is Sarah Storm. George Storm is also available in the webinar. And here is Vivica as well. We can be found on LinkedIn, all of us. And we hope that you come to the next webinar that will be happening in a couple of weeks. We will only keep talking about SaaS and how to scale and help founders get to a point where they can do this journey in different ways. So we are excited to invite you to the coming ones. And thank you for today. Bye, guys.